Let's continue by getting started on the form that is going to allow a user to eventually create a new campaign. Now, if there's been any pattern in the React side of this application so far, it's that we're trying to leverage semantic UI as much as possible so that we can avoid having to do any manual styling. That same lesson is going to apply to the form that we're going to make right here. So rather than assemble this form and all the styling in it from scratch, we're going to use semantic UI so that we automatically get a really nice looking form. Let's take a look at some of the documentation to figure out exactly how we use semantic UI to make a form. On the left-hand nav, I'm going to scroll down a little bit until I find the collections section, and inside there I'll find form. So as you might imagine, this has a bunch of different components inside of it that are going to allow us to easily create a really nice looking form. Let's just take a look at one example inside of here to get a sense of what's going on. So I'm going to look at the first example here. Notice the big note right here that says, hey, there are a whole bunch of shorthand things we can make use of if we want to. But let's just take a look at the code for this example and get a sense of what's going on. All right, so as you see, we use a top-level form component. This is not the classic HTML form tag. This is an actual form element from semantic UI. So you will see it imported here at the top. Then inside that form, we can place a couple of different form.field components. And each of those should wrap an individual label and input. In our case, our form only has one single label and one input. So I think this example right here is really just right up our alley. The other thing to take note of is at the very bottom of the form, we eventually want to place a button tag, and that's going to be used for the actual submit action. All right, I don't think this is that bad, so let's try importing the button and form elements into our component, and then start putting the form together. Back inside of new.js, we'll add our import statement at the top for form and button from semantic UI React. Then down inside of the component itself, right underneath our h1, we'll place a new instance of the form component. Inside there, we'll place a single form.field. And it's inside this field thing right here that we're going to actually place our label and our input. So I'll do a label, and we're going to label this thing as saying minimum contribution, like so. And then we also want to make sure that we have an input. We're not going to add any additional properties on the input just yet. I hesitated there for just a second. We'll come back to the input in just a second and wire up some additional event handlers and whatnot to it. But first, let's just place that submit button. So we also want to have a button on here. We're going to mark this thing as primary, just like we did previously. Remember that primary on a button gives it that nice kind of blue look that kind of draws the user's eye to it. So we'll say button primary, and I'll give it the text create, because this is going to create a new campaign. At the same time, I think we should also be a little bit more clear as to what this form is for. So instead of the h1 up here, let's add a little bit more reasonable description. I'm going to remove the entire h1 and I'll replace it with an h3 that's a little bit more reasonably sized, and I'll give it the text create a campaign, like so. All right, so you know the drill. Let's save this thing and see how it's doing in the browser. Back in the browser, all right, that definitely looks just fine. I like it. Of course, we can type stuff in, and if we click the create button right here, the form would attempt to submit itself in a very classic HTML style to our backend server, which has no idea what to do with this form submittal. So we definitely still have to hook up some event handler to the form. We also have to make sure we add some event handler to the text input right here as well, so that we record the input that the user types in. Let's take care of both those tasks in the next video.